I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. So then we watched the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every false flag starts with a false flag operation.
Hello and welcome to Historica Esoterica. I'm your friend Roswell, and I'm with
Matt K. Ultra, your enemy.
Ooh.
Balance in all things.
That's right. That's what we're all about, balance here. But before we get started, I do want to throw up a quick little content warning for whoever's listening. We are talking about some kind of heavy subjects that include violence, ritual abuse, child abuse. So if you're a younger audience, or if you're not wanting to hear that sort of thing, that's totally fair. Maybe take a hiatus. So
to be clear, we do not blame you for not wanting to listen.
That's totally fine. We're gonna try to be as delicate as possible with it. But it's a rough subject. And what that subject is Gilles de Rais, as you've corrected me on, Matt, our resident French expert.
Yeah, I took a couple years of it in high school, and I remember nothing.
Cool.
You can probably conjugate maybe one verb.
Well, that's all right. I think we're gonna have to fake our way through a bunch of names here, or at least I am. But Gilles de Rais is the main topic that we're discussing today, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Who was he?
Bad dude, let me tell you.
Yes. We're not a fan here.
Yeah, let's see. Let me pull up my little biography thing. So, as our little, I don't know, like the back of the book, the brief summary, I guess we'd say. He was a French nobleman around the, 1450s when he was most active? Or no, I guess that was
early 1400s.
Yeah, it would be 1400s. He served in the military and also killed a bunch of children.
Yes.
And those are pretty much his two most notable achievements in life.
Yep. Yeah. So I think what we'll do is, before we get to his dark crimes, we could maybe paint a picture of like who this guy was, where he comes from, maybe try to perhaps find, the type of character, before he does this that would go about this thing.
Yeah.
And then move on to the crimes, which again, we're going to try to put as delicately as possible, because boy, were they uncomfortable to read about.
They're really unpleasant.
Really sad.
Apparently I read about them in slightly more detail than you did. And
Yes.
I can agree. They're not fun to read about.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess they wouldn't be fun to talk about. So we're just going to talk about them in pretty broad strokes. This isn't like a true crime, gory detail, play-by-play podcast.
No. Yeah. Because, that would be immoral, and nobody would make that kind of content, in my opinion.
I bet there wouldn't be a market for it if they did.
But so essentially, Gilles de Rais, French guy, nobleman, he's essentially a lord. And he was born sometime in 1404 in southern Brittany, which is a part of France. And he actually has ancestry in like four very noble families: Laval, Ray or Retz, Machucal, and Crown. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is this is not just like a kind of noble guy. This is a noble guy, and I just wanted us to be pretty clear on that.
Yeah, the first source I found on him said that he was born in either 1404 or 1405 in, and I quote, the family castle. So, he was really humble beginnings for this one.
Yeah, for sure. But his parents died at a young age, so he was raised by his grandfather, who was very interested in, as a lot of lords were in the 1400s, marrying his son to someone strategically for gain of land and other things. But I thought this was really interesting. It doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about, but I think it's sort of like a weird foreshadowing, if anything. But he was engaged in 1417 at the age of 13 to a young woman, but the contract was voided because she died. So the next year, he was engaged for a second time, and that girl also died. And then the third engagement took when he was 16 years old. So just like weird. I don't think it means anything. People were dying all the time there, but it's kind of I don't know. If you to believe in like portents of things to come, that's certainly one of them.
Especially, with the context of he's said to have inspired the legend of Bluebeard, right? The noble who kills all of his wives.
His wives,
So,
exactly.
Having several of your fiancés before you're even like a real noble or an adult, having several of your fiancés die very early on is it's weird sign of things to come.
Yeah. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, this was a pretty exceptional little lordling. He spoke 3 languages. He had like a knowledge of chemistry. He was described in early sources as like this, young, handsome, rich, impetuous, hotshot kind of guy. And while he wasn't particularly academically interested, he was pretty militarily focused. So he was he was kind of a young up and comer in like the nobility of like the military side of things, which is pretty common for nobles to be enrolled in like military stuff at that time, in that place. But I actually had a quote on him from the book my main source that I wanted to read, kind of describing who this guy was to sort of paint a picture of the type of guy we're talking about. So I'm going to read that real quick. It says, is it Gilles? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't mean to instill this doubt in you. I'm sorry.
No, I'm like, now I'm really worried. But here we go. Quote, Gilles, when he appeared before the court, was dressed in pantaloons, skin tight after the fashion of the day, and shirt and vest, all of white wool with boots also white. Over this was a doublet of pearl gray silk embroidered with gold, with a hood of ermine, a sash of scarlet about his waist, which supported a poignard with a red velvet scabbard. He wore his militarier and seigneurial medals and orders, and about his neck a chain of gold with a reliquary. From the latter he never parted. How much of this description is actual and how much imaginary will probably never be known, but in the attractiveness of his person and manner, Gilles de Rais compared with the best of his race in that country, and the foregoing might have been a fairly truthful representation. He seems the model of a gentleman of his time, his life being divided between the chase, war, and his adventures. He had beauty, force, riches, and occupied the highest rank among the nobility of his province. End quote. So, this is like your fairy tale lord. He's good looking, he's young, he's rich, he's talented, and kind of, machismo. This is the guy.
I'm curious, did they make any note what was in the reliquary? Like what the relic was that he was carrying around with him?
No, so what the author there was describing was one of the portraits made of him.
Oh, I see, a portrait of him. Okay, I thought you were saying. Oh, okay,
yeah.
I got you.
It was a portrait after I think he had one portrait during the time of his life that was kind of private and not seen for a while.
Yeah.
And then there was a second portrait, and this is the one they were describing. And I believe the reliquary was just a golden cross.
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah, you said that, and I was like, oh, interesting.
What could he have in there? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, what Indiana Jones shenanigans was he getting up to? But
yeah, but maybe we'll find out about that later on.
Yeah.
But essentially, this guy, from a young age, pretty much from around the time of 16, became one of the richest barons in the province of Brittany, which is, pretty good thing to be, I guess.
Yeah, certainly beats being pretty much anyone other than the richest baron in the province. So
yes, yeah, for sure. But yeah, so this is like, your up and coming blue blood. This is a very impressive man, especially to the rest of the nobles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly given his youth when a lot of his exploits occurred.
Yeah, and so, do you want to just jump into that? Because that's kind of the more interesting part of his life.
Yeah, go
before
right
the
ahead.
evil.
Yeah, before the other interesting part of his life.
Yeah. So again, a good thing to keep in mind is that while all of this is happening, he's pretty young, like late teens to early 20s is when he like really gets into a lot of military action. Because what was happening in France at the time was some political upheaval, which I didn't do super a lot of research into it, but it essentially boiled down to a civil war.
Yeah. And
And
look, civil wars in France, dime a dozen. They
yeah,
happen
exactly.
probably every decade or so. So
Yeah.
I sort of skimmed over that. I was like, I don't
Yeah.
want to get too much into this.
I think I can go with my knowledge of what I know from this particular skirmish because of someone we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, essentially it was just a civil war. And during this, Gilles distinguished himself in his leadership while serving the King of France. And he was kind of described as like serving the crown with ardor. This is a royalist guy. He loves the King of France. He loves being rich. He loves fighting baddies. That's the kind of guy he was. But there was one story from this period right before his most famous period that stood out to me that I kind of wanted to highlight, which is from a period when Gilles and his friend Baron Beaumanoir and Ambroise de Loire, they captured a fortress in. Man, I wish I wouldn't have written the names down. What a dumb idea. These three nobles captured a fortress in Rainfort, Anjou, or whatever. I don't know. They, but anyway, it was during this conflict which the English were also kind of embroiled in. So when they captured this keep, there was a bunch of English and rebel French soldiers, and they spared the English and allowed them to go. But the treasonous French were to be punished. However, Ambroise sought to save these French, but Gilles was adamant that they would hang as traitors. He wanted to make sure that these guys died, and that's what they did. And I thought, kind of thinking of what's to come, I thought that's pretty interesting, because you have here another military leader who's like, all right, let's not kill the guys. They need to be punished. But Gilles was like, no. For king and country, we got to kill these guys.
I think they should die. I really strongly would like these people to die. And say, I
Yeah.
wonder what could possibly lead him to want that to happen.
Yes. So that I think kind of paints a picture of, he's very competent in terms of military, and I don't want to say he had a bloodlust, but I don't think he was particularly.
He gave no quarter.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. He gave no quarter, and he's a pretty fierce fighter.
Yeah.
And so then it's about this time in 1429 where he becomes associated with Joan of Arc, who most people know of, famed martyr, a young woman who kind of led. Was she in resistance to the king, or was she in resistance to the Catholics? I cannot remember.
Believe it was. Wow, I can't believe that we both dropped the ball on looking up. He's looking up the most basic facts about his most famous associate. Hang on, let me click on her Wikipedia page real quick.
She might be the most famous associate, but it's honestly one of the lesser parts of interestingness.
Okay. Heroine of France for her role in the Siege of Orleans and the coronation of Charles VII.
Okay,
there we go.
So she was trying to get Charles on the throne, and I think the church was opposing Charles, if memory serves.
And that's
why she was a heretic. Yeah. But essentially, this guy kind of, according to a lot of accounts, was like struck by her right away and just fell in love with her essentially, and became one of her most devoted followers, and was actually appointed as one of her escorts. So he was there for a lot of the important battles of her career. For example, the Battle of Orleans. And yeah, so this guy he's an important person in France at this time. And unfortunately for Joan of Arc, her story ends with her getting murdered.
She's
and
captured, handed over to the English, and then burned at the stake, which not a great way for your story to end. Which is crazy. I always forget how young she was.
Yes, and we're not here to talk about her, but she has a pretty fascinating story.
Maybe we'll talk about her on a slightly cheerier episode in the future.
Yeah, a slightly cheerier episode, which still ends with her death, which I think says a lot about this episode. But yeah, so anyway, after she gets murdered, he is appointed to the Marshal of France, which is France's highest military position. And he was only 25 at the time, which is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little older than 25, and I'm not Marshal of France. I'll say all that. So, good work, buddy, I
Granted, of
guess.
course, your life story does feature several core differences from
Yes.
Monsieur de Rais, so I guess we can't
Yeah.
complain about all of them.
That's true. Not incredibly rich, not a satanic murder pedophile. So, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, you win some, you lose some.
But yeah, so essentially this guy has just kind of been like going up and up and up, and by the time of the martyrdom of Joan of Arc, he is the Marshal of France. He's incredibly rich, and he decides, you know what, I've done it. I'm 25, past my prime in medieval times years. So he retired to his chateau, and this is kind of apparently when he begins a life of leisure. Do you have anything on this time period?
I do. I have quite a few
Okay.
things on this life of leisure.
I want to hear about it.
He built a chapel, which he called the Chapel
Yes.
of Holy Innocents, which
scary.
don't like the name.
Anybody who has innocence in their name is like worrisome. Like if you think about some of the worst popes, like Pope Innocent.
Yeah, I was about to say, including all of the popes. Like,
well, I mean, if you're a pope, you're probably evil anyway.
Yeah,
but oh, sorry, Catholics.
I promise. Soon we'll talk about a serial killer who wasn't Catholic, just to even things out. Talk about one of the Protestant ones.
We'll talk about one of the 3 non-Catholic serial killers.
But so interestingly, he officiated at this chapel and wore robes that he had designed, which I
kind of
really don't like.
You don't like that?
No, I deeply upset by, I don't know what he was teaching in his time officiating at this chapel. But
in context, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, designing your own robes, ordinarily I'd be like, yeah, I'm with you for this one.
Yeah.
Given his particular lifestyle, I'm a little leery of it.
It's a little weird. Did you see he apparently established like a religious hierarchy within his own home with his servants? Did you see this?
Yeah,
where he like appointed a bishop, and like he had all of his servants in like priestly vestments.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I don't. It seems weird.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that makes you raise your eyebrows, particularly when you consider, other people who built temples or chapels on private areas where they, assaulted children. He also, in this time period, wrote a 20,000 word play.
Yes, you saw this too.
Yeah, about his role in one of the battles that he was in.
Yes, which is very good.
It's pretty funny, admittedly.
That's pretty good.
It had almost 150 speaking parts. It required more than 500 extras. And he also provided just free food and drink to all of the people there and everybody who came to watch it, which was very expensive. He pretty much immediately had to start selling land to pay for this vanity project.
Well, and that project wasn't the only play he put on. He put on a lot of the religious plays and was heavily donating at this time. Like I think he was weirdly very suddenly and very obsessed with like, I don't want to say divinity, but with the church related stuff, if that makes any sense.
To the extent that his family eventually stepped in because they got mad that he was spending all of their money. So they reached out to, I believe, both the Pope and the King at the time. And the Pope refused to do anything. He was like, "Nah, I'm not going to condemn him. He can do what he wants." Which, fair enough. Admittedly, if you didn't know what he was doing with all his money, I would also probably go like, who cares?
Weirdly, a good call by a pope to be like, he's spending his own money.
It's fine. But then they also talked to the king because a royal edict was declared, basically denounced him for spending too much money and forbade him to sell any more property. It also encouraged everybody else in the area to not do business with him anymore. And there was
that followed? Did you think people really cared about that decree?
Well, notably, it didn't apply to the Duchy of Brittany. which is
Hmm.
interesting considering what
See, this
happens
is
later.
interesting. Yes.
And his family attempted to persuade the Duke of Brittany at the time. Hang on here, I have his name. It's down. Where did I put it? Oh, John the Fourth, the Duke of Brittany. They were unable to persuade him to stop like associating with him,
Yeah.
which is strange. If for my real Gilles de Rais trial heads, you'll know what's coming up with John the
Yep.
Fourth.
Yep.
But yeah,
Jeez.
anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing to note, that
Yeah.
royal decree, which admittedly
Yeah.
didn't officially apply to him, but still, it was not enough
Sure.
to get this guy to stop hanging out with his good old buddy.
He was yes, and I think it brings an interesting point about Gilles, which is he was a spender. He was a spendthrift. He was incredibly lavish in his lifestyle, and because of this, his cash flow situation, starts to become dire. And this is kind of what is thought to have sparked his interest in alchemy. Specifically finding the Philosopher's Stone / the Elixir of Life, which, for those of you who have not read Harry Potter or just don't know about this in general, the Philosopher's Stone is kind of like an alchemical, I guess you could call it a theory from the Middle Ages. It was like supposedly this relic you could achieve through the study of alchemy, which would allow you to turn base metals into gold, essentially a blank check. But it could also act as an elixir of life that would bring you eternal youth and make you live forever. So apparently he got obsessed with the concept of finding this, so much so that he hired 3 sorcerers that he directly employed to begin this kind of hunt, if you will.
Yeah, did you have any more on that? Because I honestly sort of brushed over his interest in alchemy. I talked about his interest in demon summoning a little bit, but
well, I think they kind of led hand in hand to each other.
Yeah,
because and I'll come back to this later, but in one of the testaments of one of the sorcerers he employed, the alchemy wasn't working, and he was getting frustrated with it, and they advised him that he needed let me just quote it exactly. This isn't pretty, but he needed hearts, hands, or eyes for but above all, blood of young children to become successful in his endeavors. And I think this is kind of where we turn into the dark story that everyone thinks of when they think of Gilles de Rais. Can I read you a quote on this, which I thought was very interesting? This is from that same book by Thomas Wilson, called The Original Bluebeard. It says, quote, "Beginning in the year 1432, a district comprising a large portion of western France, including the southern part of the province of Brittany, became excited by an undefined fear which, increased by its uncertainty and vagueness, produced in the people a feeling akin to terror. It was not the fear of war, for the people had had an intimate acquaintance with war for many years, nor was it the fear of an epidemic, nor of sudden death, and it was not easy to tell with what exactness what it was. It was so indefinite that belief in it was at first refused. It was considered by many to be the result of superstition. Some declared it to be something of the vampire race, which by some sort of resurrection had changed its horrible character so that it did not wait to prey upon the dead, but made its attacks upon the living, choosing young children and maidens, and timing the place and manner of attack so that not only was there no defense, but there was also no opportunity for pursuit or recovery." End quote.
Whew.
That's the reason I pulled that quote. Is I was reading that, and it immediately made me think of kind of the vague, like, undercurrent of terror that kind of comes about when you're looking at like the Franklin scandal or things of that ilk, the more modern Bluebeard stories, if you will. And I think it sort of describes like the fear that was being struck into the heart of peasants, in this area at this time.
Yeah, particularly the part about it being dismissed by some as superstition.
Yes.
When you talk about when you talk about just the fact that it's now called the Satanic Panic, which does a neat little job of implying that it was a silly panic and there was nothing going on.
Thanks, evangelicals.
Yeah.
Providing the real Satanist with a cover story.
Yep.
Yep.
But yeah, that quote is really good.
It is. And so essentially this is about the time when just young people, regardless of sex, begin to vanish. And the age range could be anywhere as old as 16 to as young as 6, which is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, the range of like children who were murdered in this way varies pretty widely. Most people that I found put it somewhere around 140 is like the
Yeah.
most likely estimate. Some of them go as low as like 60, some of them go as high as 800.
Yep.
Um
I think
so
even if your lowest estimate is 60, that is still an insane
yeah,
body
you
count.
did kill someone. Yeah, because that is, I
Yes.
mean, just to put things in perspective, like Ted Bundy killed what, like 20 people?
I
Like,
think so, yeah.
yeah, like the most notorious American serial killers, that were
Yeah.
caught and prosecuted, killed about 20 people, realistically speaking. Some of them confessed to more, some of them confessed to less, but that's usually the range we're looking at. And so the fact that the lowest we get for Gilles de Rais is 60, it kind of paints a picture, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and so I guess my question to you, and we know the answer, but for the viewers is why kidnap, abduct, and kill this many young people?
Well, yeah, we do know the answer to this. So I think there's a couple answers, right? There's the fact that he clearly enjoyed doing it. Like if you read the accounts of it, he this this was something that he enjoyed doing.
He literally, if you'll excuse the crudeness of the term, he literally got off on this.
Yeah,
And
which
that's
not
about
an
as far as I'll
exaggeration.
go.
Yeah, um, but yeah, and so there's that aspect of it. There's the aforementioned ritual aspect of it, right? That he
Yes.
believed he needed to kill children in order to get, the secrets of alchemy and demon summoning and all the other various little occult areas he was kicking around in.
It was really interesting because one of the sources I was looking at said that he was attempting to commune with the evil one, capital E, capital O, which
Yeah.
is, I'm assuming they're talking about the devil, but
Yeah.
that is such a vague title that it was like scary to read, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense.
Also, if you're attempting to commune with the evil one, I don't know what's going through your head. You
Yes.
can't be communing with the evil one.
You cannot commune with the evil one.
It's exactly what it says on the box. Don't trust him. I don't
It's the
think he's
evil
going to do
one.
you any favors. He's the evil one,
Yes.
guys.
Yeah, that is a Historica Esoterica hard stance. No communing with the evil one.
But yeah, I have just a couple notes about like the murders themselves. I'm not going to get graphic
Let's
with
do
it.
it. Let's get it over with.
So yeah, again, I'm just going to restate the content warning. I'm not going into detail here. My notes do, and I put on top of the notes, probably don't read this, and I'm not going to.
Please don't.
But so in his confession, he stated his first murder took place somewhere between the spring of 1432 and the spring of 1433, which, for those of you following along with the timeline, is while he was still involved in court politics and the military. Just interesting little note. When he moved to, I believe it's Mashikul, is how you pronounce it, is when things really began ramping up. Because this castle is the one where like they would, do things.
This is the murder, and I believe this is the castle with the special tower where his alchemy room was and the furnaces. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so the first documented child to go missing was a local furrier's apprentice, who was asked by Gilles' cousins, because I also didn't write down many names. I mean, I didn't write down the names just because I didn't want to pronounce them. But Gilles' cousins, they asked him to deliver a message, and when the boy never returned, and they were asked about it, they stated they didn't know where he had went, and they just sort of suggested that, no, maybe he'd been kidnapped by thieves while he was in the forest.
Right.
And this one in particular is the first one that there was witness testimony of, because the boy's parents and the furrier and several other people who had just been in the area all testified that this is what occurred.
Right.
And there's so many cases like that.
Yes.
Just the overwhelming amount of witness testimony is what finally convinced the courts that he was guilty.
Yeah. Which I think when we go into like the kind of the contention about his guilt later on. I think that's a very important piece to remember, which is
Mhm.
like the almost, I don't want to call it an absurd number of witnesses, but enough that you clearly can't write off that something was going on.
Yeah. And so, yeah, in his 1971 biography, Jean Benedetti described the general manner in which people were generally lured in by Gilles, and
Mhm.
he frequently, it seems that he focused on boys, but it was both sexes did suffer. But anyway, in this quote, he's referring to them as boys because that seems to be his target of choice generally.
Right.
So, quote, he was pampered and dressed in better clothes than he had ever known. The evening began with a large meal and heavy drinking, which acted as a stimulant. The boys were then taken to an upper room in which only Gilles and his immediate circle were admitted. There he was confronted with the true nature of his situation. The shock thus produced on the boy's face was an initial source of pleasure for Gilles. So closing the quote there. And then, yeah, without going into too many details, they would molest the children and then kill them in various
Gruesome
unpleasant
ways.
manners.
Yeah.
And then they disposed of their bodies in the fireplace.
In a big furnace, yeah. And I think it's important to note that they did mutilate the bodies.
Yes, they did. Yeah. No need to go
Yeah.
into detail on how
Nope.
they did these things. You can find it if you want.
Yeah, but you shouldn't want that.
Yeah, it's not worth knowing. It's
No, it's really upsetting. But there's one thing I want to, that quote that you talked about. Again, when we talk about Franklin or what were the other two that you mentioned? Like
I
Epstein,
mentioned Epstein and Mark Dutroux,
Mark
a big
Dutroux.
one for the program to kill heads out there, I
Yes.
think.
So if we think about like modern child sex trafficking scandals, I guess you could call them, cabals, there's, at least with the Franklin scandal, which is the one I'm most familiar with, there was a pattern of getting young women to come to these parties, and it was
Mhm.
like fun, and they gave them marijuana or maybe harder drugs and alcohol, not dissimilar to what they did with this young boy. And it was like initially it's kind of like wow, this is so fun, I'm sneaking out, I'm being bad, and I'm getting pampered with adults. And then they get brung into like the quote unquote inner circle where
Yeah,
things
and
start
it
to get,
takes a turn.
it takes a very dark turn. And just like that parallel from an account from the 1400s contrasted with an account from the 1980s, that kind of shook me to my core.
Yeah, it was crazy reading it and that, like, just like you said, like that absolute parallel. So I
Yeah.
will note, Mark Dutroux sort of stands out here in that he was a Belgian serial killer,
Yes.
who the police repeatedly and incredibly like obvious like tips that they were given, and just things like, I believe there's one time where they were recording his house and the cameras just happened to turn off whenever he went out and then went back inside, like things like that. He was probably connected to a larger ring. So he, I would argue, is most similar to Gilles just in the aspect of the, the torture and murder part,
Yes. Yes.
without maybe having the same powerful connections that someone like Larry King Jr. or Epstein
Right.
has.
Right. But in the broad strokes, he's the, for for all intents and purposes, a modern noble, um,
Yeah,
who is soliciting and essentially abducting and killing young people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Franklin in particular, I think, is the most striking in that regard. Just the
Absolutely.
complete and total similarity in the playbook here.
Yeah. And
Um,
unfortunately, eventually, we're gonna have to do that episode. I don't even
yeah,
want to think about it.
it's
So
an
hopefully,
episode.
it's a long
Frank,
way away.
yeah, I don't really want to get into things like the Franklin scandal, stuff like that, until
Yeah.
we're a little more, grounded. We've got a little more research under our belts, and frankly,
Yeah.
until we've had a little more time to put it off and just not think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's tough, but so yes. So this is what's happening. It's this. It's just an act of unimaginable evil that's going on in this noble's house. And another aspect that was similar is kind of the inaction of authority figures to do anything
Hmm.
about it, in spite of an initial sources of evidence, until it piles up to the point where it can't be ignored, right?
Yeah,
Which is disheartening, I guess,
Yeah.
to say the least. But that is another thing that is kind of a similar connection between a lot of these cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
And
you
yeah,
want to talk
so
about the black magic anymore? It's a little less gross than this if we want to get ourselves out of this
yeah, go
hole.
ahead. Yeah, we'll launch into the black magic. Then we'll talk about how he got caught. And I've got a couple notes on some revisionist takes on him.
Yeah, so essentially they were harvesting these children as a resource to distill into different liquids and mineral substances for formulas to for the invocation of demons. They were, I think we've said this before, but I just want to illustrate it. Like, according to several people's testimony that were involved with Gilles and his own testimony, which we'll get to, they were trying to invoke demons. They were trying. There was a specific one whose name is eluding me at the moment.
I believe it was Baron, actually. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Trump?
Yeah. Worrying parallel.
No. So yeah, and I think, again, like if you've got your own alchemy tower with a furnace and you're, ritualistically killing people, and you've got 3 sorcerers and you're searching for alchemy, to me it's not much of a stretch that there is some sort of demon worship going on here, right? And I think there is a tendency sometimes among more secular things to like downplay like Satanism elements in like these past cases. But I don't know. If these people in the 1400s definitely believed in God, then they definitely believed in Satan. And somebody who's doing something so horrible, it almost goes without saying that like they would have to believe that somehow they were falling under his domain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're doing it like De Rais was, in explicit pursuit of power, right? Because
Exactly.
a little later on in this episode, I want to talk with you just briefly about why this sort of abuse seems so common and like what the motivators might be. But spoiler for what I think it is, I think a big part of it is pursuit of power.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I don't know. It boggles the mind. When we get into the revisionist takes on him, I'll give my 2 cents fully. But
we'll get on our little soapboxes.
We'll get on our soapboxes. But yeah, it's very interesting, the number of people who seem very invested in making sure that no one thinks this was about the devil.
Yeah, pretty interesting. So Gilles wasn't charged until 1440, and for those of you keeping track, that's about, what is that, 8 years?
Yeah, it's about 8 years.
Which is a long time for this to be going on. And the charges were initially brought forth by the Bishop of Nantes,
Yeah.
who produced several witnesses. More were to come. The thing that I thought was interesting is the investigation initially began in secret, unbeknownst to Ray, which, so they were working behind the scenes to crack this guy, and he didn't know about it until he was issued a citation to come and answer the charges.
And did you see, this is just a weird note. I didn't look into this. This is one of the things where when I was using Wikipedia as a springboard, I just sort of wrote it down and forgot to look into it more. But it says that the reason that the Bishop of Nantes initially started looking into it was that he kidnapped a cleric following a dispute at a church.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah, seems like a strange way to deal with that problem. Especially if I had, killed hundreds of people, I would probably not be drawing attention to myself by publicly kidnapping members of the clergy.
It was a different time.
But yeah, so the bishop, once he published his findings, was able to obtain the prosecutorial cooperation of this former protector, our old friend John IV, the Duke of Brittany.
Yes. So it wasn't until this information became public and heavily substantiated by witnesses and another authority figure that John hopped off board.
Yeah, and then was like, we can throw this guy under the bus. We might as well.
So, and I just do want to give a quick, I don't know anything about him, but just based off of this knowledge alone, quick shouts out to the Bishop of Nantes for, being, I guess, the only hero in this story.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. In spite of what you might think of bishops and what I might think of bishops, he did all right on this one.
Yeah, it was a good call on his part.
Yes. one thing that was interesting about the trial is that it was conducted by both the secular and the ecclesiastical courts, meaning the king's court and the church's court, on charges that included murder, sodomy, and heresy. Which, in light of the crimes we just heard of, those three charges,
Yeah, they don't sound harsh enough.
they don't. I don't know if there was a different connotation, or if in the domain of the law, like maybe sodomy had some broader things that fell under the umbrella term.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, and like one thing that was interesting, and this is just straight from the Wikipedia, but there was a transcript of a bunch of the testimony of parents of children who gave graphic depictions of the murders, provided by de Rais' accomplices, who gave
Mhm.
graphic depictions of the murders. And apparently they were so lurid that the judges ordered the worst parts to be struck from the record, which, if you can make a guy in 1440 go like, yeah, cut that out,
Yeah, especially
that's got to
considering
be
just
pretty
like,
rough.
yeah, like the means of execution that would just be shown publicly on a Thursday. Like it's,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, very not good. Also, just the idea of, parts of a trial that features powerful figures abusing children just being struck from the record and having a judge go, oh, no, people
Yes.
don't need to hear about that.
Yeah.
That also, I raised my eyebrows at that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, now the other thing that's interesting is, and I forgot to mention this when we were talking about how the investigation was initially secret, but the book I was reading, which is from like the late 1800s, said that the Bishop of Nantes investigation initially operated like a grand jury, which I thought was quite interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, another kind of dark parallel between this and some other cases of mass abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything else you want to say about the trial?
Well, I've got some notes about the conclusion, but nothing
Okay,
about
let's
the
hear it.
trial. Oh, actually, one other note about the trial. And this, I guess, kind of also will be brought up during the revisionist takes. But some people, when they argue that, Gilles was innocent or framed, they make note of the fact that the Duke of Brittany stood poised to inherit all of his lands.
Yes.
And I actually, personally, thought that this was also a parallel with these modern cases, right? Which is to say
Yes.
that these people, if you are running a case like this, there's only two ways that you go down, at least that we've seen, which is to say the evidence against you becomes overwhelming, and then subsequently you expend your usefulness, and
Yep.
people start to jump ship.
Yes.
And, the assets get divided up amongst the remaining members of the cabal, and off with the one sicko who was working alone. There was no one with him. Don't
Yeah.
ask where I was that day.
Exactly. So, and I think, to me, that's like, I had the same exact thought, and that's like kind of the most likely explanation of this when we talk about like the contention between it. But I think at the very least, you could say like this sort of interest in his estate and like kind of the dividing of his assets, at the very least, could just be seen as opportunism.
Yeah,
Which is going to be bound
exactly.
to happen.
Which is to say, yeah, if there's like an incredibly wealthy serial killer going down, and you're
Yeah.
a noble who's in the area, I mean, you'd be
You're
kind
like,
of dumb
yeah,
not to try
actually,
and jump on it. Yeah,
yeah, he owed me 1,000 horses, so
yeah.
just so you know, don't
But
trust him. He's a liar and a Satanist. But
notably, like all those parents of children, like they weren't going to
yeah,
get a castle out of that. They
no, of
just
course not.
wanted their murdered children to see justice.
Yes.
So I don't know, focusing on the fact that one of the powerful sickos decided it was no longer useful to cover for his friend who he had been the whole time. I don't think that puts as much of a shadow on the trial as many people seem to think.
No, I don't think so either. And yeah, do you want to just jump into like the contention between like the findings of the trial? Because
Yeah,
spoiler
sure.
alert, he was found guilty and hung.
Yeah, he was hanged,
And
and then he was burned. The only note I have about that is that his body was cut down before it could fully burn and was claimed for burial by, and this is another quote from that biography.
oh yeah, the four
yeah,
ladies.
four ladies of
repeat-
high rank, which
Yeah, weird.
didn't really go into that anymore. Although I believe it was his daughter who,
She like set up a shrine for him.
yeah, she
didn't
set up a little shrine at his burial site, and now it's like, well, it became a holy
Yeah.
site.
That like
And
pregnant women would go to.
yeah, which I I don't like that. And then the
Nope.
Jacobins during the French Revolution just completely
Yeah,
destroyed
yeah.
it. Uh,
Which, good work, people.
yeah,
Handshakes
critical
all around.
support to the Jacobins for what they did there.
You know what is something that was really interesting, and just the last thing about like kind of his death is that like he was kind of noted for being like contrite and composed when faced with execution, and because of this he got posthumous acclaim as like the model of Christian penitence. Did you see that?
Yeah,
Which
which
is like
I don't think so.
it's like our buddy died, so like yeah, we'll give him, we couldn't save him, but we'll give him a little something.
Yeah,
Which uh, there's some pretty gross like traditions that emerged from this to like observe his death, which was the parents around Nantes commemorated the anniversary of his execution by whipping their children, to impress
grief.
upon them the gravity of the sins for which he had repented, which supposedly survived for more than a century after his death.
I really don't like. I mean, just what a gross, like, just it's a slap in the face that in order to commemorate his death, people started abusing their children more.
Their own children.
Yeah, like
Which, and I don't know how widespread it was or how many of the people actually observed it, but the fact that it was enough of a thing to be recorded is kind of like, I don't know.
yeah,
It's just the last laugh of the most evil people.
yeah, exactly. Like it really is just sort of an echo out there of like an aspect of this ritual lived on for a much longer time than I imagine they anticipated it would. Also,
Yes.
he's not the model of Christian penitence. I'm sorry.
No.
Just look at like the New Testament, like the sinner who approaches Jesus perhaps as a better example because she didn't murder hundreds of children.
Yeah.
Things like that, right?
Or literally any of the good people. Or just, I don't know, maybe, what's his name? Jesus?
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, the model of Christian penitence. It's just like, and again, this is kind of one of my big problems with the Catholic Church is you take something good and then you twist it, or you take something bad and then you twist it to the opposite.
Yeah.
And who's the father of the lie? Satan. And that's all I'll say about the connections between Satan and the Catholic Church. But
I know we have at least one Catholic listener. We've got to go at least a little softer
Do we?
on them soon. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
apologies to our Catholic listener. It's not you. It's the church. I apologize. But anyway, so that was something that I wanted to point out, which was just kind of like a little sickening. But I also wanted to point out that this comes from Britannica.com to kick off our talking about like the contention between whether or not he was innocent or guilty. So this is a quick little quote from Encyclopedia Britannica. It says, quote, "In modern times, revisionists have questions whether or not de Rais was truly guilty of the crimes for which he was executed, noting that his confession was extracted using the threat of torture. Most historians who have examined the evidence from de Rais' trial, though, continue to believe that he did in fact commit the murders," end quote. So if you're a historian, like the people who are looking at the actual sources tend to agree that he probably committed the murders. But we have some people who say he didn't. And Matt, why don't you tell us about these lovely people?
Say, and spoiler alert, it's a bunch of weird occultists and journalists. Who could have guessed?
Yeah, who would have thought? Wait,
so
are you saying we can't trust journalists, Matt?
I would never say something like that.
You would never say something like that.
After all, they told us that the Franklin scandal was a carefully crafted hoax, and who am I to doubt that? Surprise, surprise, Aleister Crowley liked him.
Yeah.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah.
So he gave a lecture on him that I started reading and frankly could not bring myself
I
to
did the same
read all the way
thing.
through.
Gosh, he's such a dweeb. I hate
He's
that guy.
Obnoxious. Another person that we'll cover once we've worked ourselves
It's
up
like
to it.
reading Elon Musk tweets where you're like, dude, just die. Like, I don't like you.
Yeah, it is crazy how much he sucked.
Yes.
But
I mean, maybe not, considering he was literally an occultist freak.
Yeah, good point.
You're like, oh, I can't believe these Satanists are rude and bad.
I can't believe the Great Beast 666 was not a great dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was mostly using de Rais, honestly, just as a way of like dunking on Christians and going like, LOL, look at how dumb they are.
He was read at Atheist Missing Out, and he was also like drawing a parallelism between like kind of the controversy and backlash he was facing, being like, oh, I'm being improperly martyred by these, religious people. It
Yeah.
was kind of like the point he was making, which is like, first off, you're doing spooky stuff. You're calling yourself the wickedest man in the world. And then you're
Yeah.
mad when people are freaked out by it. Like, you're being a contrarian and you're being shocking and you're mad that people are shocked. Like, I don't get that at all.
Yeah. So that's what I had. What did I say? It was like, it was a way of dunking on Christians and being an edgy provocateur, which I then put in parentheses for
Yes.
real break from form.
Fair.
But yeah, so I don't know. That was his general thing. There was one like particularly annoying line where he like also refers to himself as a baby killer and like talks about how it was cool. And it's like, yeah, I know that he was being sarcastic. I forgot to look it up, but I also know that a child, an infant, died while it was under Aleister Crowley's care because it was in like a heroin-filled like house of sin. And I don't remember if that happened before or after this, but if it was after, kind of poor choice of words, Aleister. I wouldn't have said that myself. So yeah, he just sort of like says like, oh, his only real sin was the pursuit of knowledge and forbidden things breaking from Christianity. He also did like a, well, that seems like a bit much kind of thing, where he's the guy who puts the estimate at 800 children. To be clear. So he is the only source I've found that said that de Rais killed 800 children, and then he immediately says, and that sounds a little high, don't you think? Well, yes, it does sound a little high.
Like,
Notably,
man, I can't believe the BTK killed 1 million people. That sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
My source? Oh, yeah, I just heard that.
And then so my only other note on the thing, just for fun, sometimes I'll look up like Goodreads reviews of things like this, and I found a banger. So I'm going to quote from this. This is the other quote I have. Revisionist drivel from one witch on the topic of another. People get so excited by banned books, but why? Because they offend Catholics? The only interesting part of this lecture is Crowley's rock star endorsement of murdering children in the name of science for the betterment of humanity. Crowley is a show-off, a dandy who flexes his cerebral muscles to gain the same effect of a peacock preening its feathers. I thought he was weird before reading this, and now I think the things he says are evil. So I don't want to read out like the name of the person who wrote this because it is just like her actual name, but I just like to say, you rock. I'm a huge fan.
She rocks so hard. Yeah. That is so, and by the way, 100% on the money. Cause like when I said like him and his ilk were like edgy atheists of like the late 19th century. I mean, I think it holds up cause it's like just that it's just, you're just being provocative. You're just being shocking because you're raging against the machine, but not in any way that is like providing any change for anyone else, but in like a selfish kind of performative way where like a me. You're seeing yourself as an iconoclast, but what you're breaking down is just things people like to further your own means, and it's just gross.
And so my message to Aleister Crowley: take a hike.
Take a hike, buddy.
It's a good joke for those of you who know about his mountaineering experience.
I didn't even think about that. That is good.
Man.
Wow.
I'm a genius.
Okay. You're a smart cookie there.
Anyway, the other revisionist take that I want to talk about comes from one Margaret Murray, who I was hoping isn't the right word. I thought might be related to Henry Murray, the scientist who MK Ultra'd Ted Kaczynski. She isn't.
Oh.
They just share a last name, unfortunately.
Or maybe by design.
Yeah, who knows? She's known for her poorly sourced and widely discredited witch cult hypothesis, which held that the witch trials of the early modern period, which is the ones that started around the mid-1500s and then carried on through the early 1700s, were an attempt to stamp out a pagan religion that worshipped a horned fertility god. Pretty much...
And not Shaitan.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you've ever met one of the people who like tries to ignore Baphomet's symbolic and occultic meanings, it's just like, but he's just a fertility god, he's cool. This is probably where they get that from, and they're also probably wrong. But that's the story for another time. This theory also greatly influenced Wicca, which I have my own beef with. So admittedly, I'm going pretty hard against the theory, in part because of that.
So Wicca, all I ever knew about Wicca was like goth girls in high school that like I shared a lunch table with. who, by the way, were all very cool, but they would all tell me about like Wicca, and they're like, "Oh, it's the original religion or whatever." It was made in like the 1800s.
Yeah, it was made in like 1909.
I found that out like 2 weeks ago, and I was so mad because I was like, "There's a girl named Phoenix who I'm shaking my fist at right now." If you're listening, Phoenix, you were wrong, but also you're cool, so it's fine.
But yeah, like that's yeah. So Margaret Murray is known as like the grandmother of Wicca because of how much
Yeah.
this theory influenced it. And also, shockingly, it's not backed up by any reputable experts on witch trials, pagan activities in Europe,
No.
or just religious scholars and historians in general. My personal favorite example of like the thing where she just like straight up ignored like a fact is she argued that like in England, the witch trials started right when England became Christianized, and they were just trying to stamp out these pagans who were just trying to practice their own beliefs. But England was Christianized like 1,000 years before the witch trials began,
Right.
and there is no evidence of the witch cult's activities before, like in that time period. They were just witch
Yeah.
trials. She also reportedly ignored all instances of like miraculous or unexplainable events that occurred during witch trials or were testified about during them. So she was the original model of like the, like the Crucible style. Like
Miller,
they just didn't like that these women had like sexual autonomy.
These
so they accused
empowered
them of
women.
witchcraft. They were just
Yeah.
too empowered. It's like, no, I think they just believed in witches. And you know what? I'm not going to say that all 50,000 of the people put to death during the witch trials deserved it, because
No.
frankly, most of them probably didn't. But
almost
also,
all of them probably didn't.
Again, neither of us have trouble criticizing the actions of the Catholic Church.
No.
But like we've said before, people back then definitely believed in God. So they also definitely believed in the devil. And you're kidding yourself if you think that no one would try to use that to gain power.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Her theory made for a pretty compelling, like, Christians were actually the bad guys and the practitioners of black magic were the good guys narrative. Yeah, so, who can blame her for not worrying about things like sources or truth?
It's like the golden compass.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, what if God was actually bad? And it's like, well, good thought there, buddy.
Yeah, whoa. That'd be pretty crazy. But anyway, she argued that Gilles de Rais was framed because he was practicing the fertility cult and was actually worshipping the goddess Diana. There's no evidence for this. She just kind of decided that was the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it seems like he might.
Yeah.
He just seems like the type.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Is that all that you had to say about Margaret?
That's all I had to say about our friend Margaret.
Okay.
My personal enemy, Margaret.
I had a feeling you'd go into the occult, like occultist, like contrarians, because I wanted to see if like there was any like weight to like that, because absolutely there have been cases where the Catholic Church has gotten a little wild and put to death somebody who didn't do it, for counter grab,
or launched a crusade or two, like
yeah, because sometimes you launch a crusade. We've all had one, but. So I wanted to look in the other sources that were like contending this, and like you said, they were all like journalists and writers, and it was funny because like the one was like a journalist who like held a mock retrial in 1990 in France.
I want to talk about that,
which is so funny because they're like, oh yes, and then they like declared in this court, they're like, actually we don't find him guilty based on the evidence, but it was like noted that like there was just no medieval academics there
were no medieval
invited.
Academics. There were no actual like legal representatives there.
Yeah,
it was just a group of people going, actually we couldn't find any bodies from these murders that occurred 500 years ago, so we're pretty sure it never happened.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly.
When I was reading about that mock retrial, it felt exactly the same as the going back to the Satanic Panic. Are you familiar with the False Memory Foundation?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, that group founded by people who ran a porn magazine that included pictures of children in it. I just think if all you can think to do with your life, if you're like, I should start a charity, what should my charity be dedicated to? Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Protecting people accused of being pedophiles and doing satanic practices.
Right.
Found one for dogs, like just start a shelter for animals, start a soup kitchen.
There's no one else that the false memory is protecting. It's always pedophiles and Satanists. There's nobody who's like I don't know, like a like someone like arrested, for like breaking and entering that they didn't have anything to do. Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
nobody who's like loitering that gets protected by the false memory association. I don't know.
Yeah, they're like, well, I think someone needs to look out for someone needs to look out for Michael Aquino because he can't take care of himself, so he needs more money
Yeah.
behind him. And similarly, like Gilles de Rais, the most like wealthy and powerful noble of his time, like, well,
Yeah.
won't someone think of him? We need to clear his name.
Yeah.
Like, it's 1982, guys, or wait, when was it? 1992. It's like Michel Foucault's still alive. Go track him down. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
yet another powerful French pedophile who's just kind of hanging
Yeah.
out. Like,
Somebody get Hunter Biden so he stops trafficking women. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if that's actually true. I shouldn't say that. But
Gilles de Rais' laptop.
Yeah. Oh boy.
We were trying to
Anyway.
start this. We were trying to be serious on this one, guys. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. We needed to break the tension.
We did. I was feeling really uncomfortable. I'm glad we made it through the gross stuff. But anyway, the whole point being the last source I found, because I'm like, okay, that's obviously bunk. So I found an article from 2017, which is talking about how like, oh, there's a modern movement to exonerate this notorious medieval serial killer. And it's talking about like all this stuff. And their source for this quote unquote movement was not the occultist we talked about, not that journalist we talked about, but just a lady named, her name was also Margaret K. Juby, who calls herself Gilles de Rais' representative on Earth, and is determined to clear his name worldwide. She maintains the website Gilles de Rais was innocent, which is like, I mean, there are so many social causes you can get behind. You're worried on a guy from 600 years ago. I don't know. So I looked at her book to see if like there was anything to it, and let me go ahead. I need to find and send you this book because I looked at it and immediately started laughing. Let me send this to you.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's called The Martyrdom of Gilles de Rais, and so I took one look at the book, and
astonishing cover.
Yes.
Just really graphic design is my passion kind of vibe off of that.
It's got 9 ratings. It was released in 2018. And boy, like I'm not going to read it here, but I remember reading the, like, what do you call it? The description of it. And it is pretty funny. And I looked this lady up, Margaret K. Juby. And she doesn't seem to have written anything else. She's got a Twitter where she has some kind of pictures of her being kind of goth and spooky. So I was like, okay.
Checks out, I guess.
Yeah, so I think we can pretty definitively say that we stand with the historians that he probably did all of those things. The details are subject lost to history, but for the most part, I mean, we actually have a lot of details, but
yeah,
he definitely did it.
Yeah, we are both very comfortable, I think, you're saying he did these things.
Yes. And if he was wrongly convicted, then God knows of it, and
yeah, then he'll
be fine.
You know what? Yeah,
he's
exactly.
Covered.
Let's focus on all the wrongfully convicted people who didn't murder children ritualistically, like, or you know what, even like the people who are convicted on, say, I don't know, like a drug offense. Like, let's donate our money towards them and not the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
People who had possession of marijuana when they were like 16 and got like 20 years of prison.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like the sons of elites are just like trafficking women. It's like, oh, those crazy guys.
So we gotta cover up for our friend Gilles de Rais.
Yeah.
I'm looking through the description of this book. Everything you always wanted to know about Gilles de Rais, but were afraid to ask. Okay.
I wasn't afraid to ask anything.
Yeah, we were fairly confident in what we asked, and I think, frankly, I trust our answers more than yours.
Yes. Yeah, it's just a weird chip on your shoulder to have. It's one of those things where I wonder what inspires you. I think like the one quote she had is like she was reading a book about him being described as like a black magic sorcerer, and she's like, I had to know more. And so like my thoughts are like, okay, you thought this guy is cool.
Yeah, which choose a better role model.
Yeah, for real.
No, I'm seeing the goth and spooky pictures now.
You know what I'm talking about now,
I
right?
see what
Yeah.
you're talking about. This was definitely
Yeah.
motivated reasoning. She absolutely thinks this guy is cool.
Yes. So
Okay, but so final note, just to ring us out, bring us back to
yeah.
the subject at hand. Also, possibly bring the mood down a little bit. So sorry if this is how the episode ends.
Yeah.
What we alluded to this earlier. Why do you think this sort of ritual abuse crops up so much in powerful circles? Like, what's the deal here? What do you think is the cause of this?
Well, you kind of hinted at it earlier, and I think it's pretty simple in its power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not people believe they're actually like sacrificing children or like doing terrible deeds in order to gain power, to quote gain 1,000 souls in hell, as that
Mm-hmm.
one guy famously said. His name escapes me, but whether or not they actually believe that some darker power is actually granting them this, or whether it's like some sort of initiation to desensitize themselves against evil. At the very least, it's symbolic of power. Because
Mm-hmm.
what is the worst thing you can think of doing, Matt? And it's
It's
abusing a child, right? And killing a child. Like that is,
Mhm.
I mean, I think that is arguably near, if not at the top.
Yeah.
And if you can do that with impunity and get away with it, you have power. And I think at the very base level, that's what it is.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I think, on like the ritual aspect of it, right? There's pursuit of power. There's the fact that it can be a display of power for its own sake, like you were saying. If you can do this sort of thing and not face any consequences, you have power. I also
Yep.
think, in cases like the Franklin scandal or Epstein later on, I think participating in these things might be a requirement to gain further power, because it
exactly.
creates a sort of bond, right? Maybe not like we're all best buddies because we did this, but more of a,
Yeah.
if I go down, I can take everybody else
I'm
with
taking
me
you
kind
with
of
me.
thing.
Yeah, it's mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, and especially considering that we know that Epstein filmed things. We know that it's in the very least alleged that Larry E. King Jr. also filmed things at his parties.
Yes.
So I think there's that aspect of it as well. And I also think there are just people out there who want to do this sort of thing. And when given the
Yeah.
power to do so, they can, right? Like, because by all accounts, even by his own, Gilles de Rais was enjoying what he was doing. This wasn't like him going like, this is what I must do to gain further power. He was also, I think the ritual aspect of it was also an excuse to do it and a way of covering for his desire to do it.
Absolutely. And listen, I'm of the mind that, and maybe your one Catholic friend out there who I would like to be friends with and extend an olive branch to, but we're of the mind that these people will face some sort of judgment. But either way, yeah, it's just inexcusable. It's horrible. And Matt's going to do something about it very soon, I've heard.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to do something real. I've been
Do
watching
something real.
Taxi Driver, if you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Did I tell you that Marty's been sending me, like, we'll say materials one at a time, like links to Home Depot? Like
I thought
every
you were
week,
joking. That's so funny.
no, it's just like, oh, nails, cool, okay, cool. Oh, sulfur, or whatever. I don't know. So pretty soon here we'll be in the news too.
But
no, just
yeah,
kidding.
I'd just like to close this out on a slightly more
Yeah.
hopeful note. I'd like to
Yeah.
say, some of these people, in fact, a lot of these people who are involved in things like this, everybody involved in the Duray case obviously is long since dead. And lots of people involved in some of our, more contemporary rings are dead, but not all of them. And I think it is important that we don't just surrender into despair and say like, well, the elites run everything and there's nothing we can do. To channel my inner John Oliver, you gotta advocate for this sort of thing, and you need to make sure that victims' voices are heard when they speak up, because a lot of forces will come together and try to keep them down. So yeah, all we've got is each other in something like this, and we need to.
All you need is love.
Well, maybe not all you need, but all we have, in the very least, is love.
Exactly.
And so yeah, I don't know, just ending it on a more serious note, a more saccharine note even than I usually will. I'm just going to say, look out for each other and uplift people who you can when they come forward about powerful people doing things like this.
Keep close watch on your kids. You're their only protection. Don't enroll them in any government programs. That's not a joke.
Yeah, and if a man has spooky eyebrows, keep an eye on him.
Keep an eye on him.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it feels kind of weird to go into plugs right after talking about the pedophiles who run the government, but
It does. But here we go.
here we go. We're going to go for it anyway. You can follow us on Twitter at histesoteric. This might be the first time I've gotten that right. You can follow us on Instagram at Historica Esoterica, because they don't have a limit on characters and usernames, at least not one that I've hit. And we finally, by the people I mean my twin brother Michael, have been advocating for this for a long time. We have a YouTube channel now.
Yes.
There's a really cool
Michael was
animation
asking for it. I put in all the work just for you, Michael.
Yeah, there's a really cool animation. I greatly enjoy it.
So
I
cool.
love the little intro that you slapped together for us as well.
Yeah. I need to tighten it up, but
yeah. So you can. Do we have all of our episodes up there right now?
no, I gotta, because I have to go actually make them as videos. So I'm gonna be slowly uploading them. So probably by the time this drops, we'll have most of them.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, no rush on that, of course. But yeah, just know that the people are waiting.
Okay, good to know that the Michael is waiting.
But yeah, so you can go over there, you can subscribe, or if you just want to have it going in another tab while you work on your work, bump up our views a little bit, our engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're listening on YouTube, hey, give us a like, give us a subscription, and no matter where you're listening, get in touch with us. Contact us on the various social media platforms. Just let us know what you think. If there's anything you want us to cover, we're open to suggestions. And with all that said, I'm just going to say, keep an eye on things out there, watch out for each other, and remember, it's all connected.